Hey there, you beautiful nerds. Welcome back. So today I want to talk to you about the Internet of Things, and a few other short, interesting stories. Hope you stick around. Now, when most of you think about the Internet of Things, you think about the smart devices in your home. So that could be your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, and other cool, interesting devices. But Internet of Things is a bit more than that. You have all these amazing devices that we have, but the interesting thing is that they're now able to communicate over a wireless or a wired network and actually communicate with each other. And that opens up some really, really interesting possibilities. Today, I'm going to showcase one of the interesting companies in Kenya that I've had the privilege of working on, and some of the cool stuff they're building with smart water meters. Now, the company I want to talk to you today about is Peppo. Now, what Peppo does is they build smart water meters. And not only are they taking, you see the old water meters that you see on the left or the right side of your screen. These were probably put in the early 70s, and never been maintained, very manual water meters. And on this other side is a water meter that Peppo builds. Now, having a smart water meter opens up some interesting possibilities. One, people get really accurate billing for the water that they consume, but also it helps the different local governments start understanding water consumption trends in different places, and start figuring out, how do we prioritize water in places where there's none. Now, what I want to talk to you today is how they are in fact able to get these meters to talk to the cloud and pull some really interesting data, and at the end of it I'll show you what that ends up looking like. Right, cool. So I'll go ahead and jump into a quick demo. So the first thing I want to show you is a couple of devices that I have on here, right? So right in front of your screens you see there's this Android Things device, and that's a really actually interesting device. It runs a version of Android. It's an NXP device. And right next to it, right here, is a Raspberry Pi. Now, this might actually look really familiar for those of you who love prototyping, and so I'll actually do some demos on this, right? Cool. So let's get back to here. Now, Peppo building a really interesting application. This is sort of what it looks like. Now, you have on one side your IoT devices and sensors, and in this case, they're water meters. And then this sort of meter puts data into either a custom collector, and that's probably sits in a VM, or you can push data into an IoT hub. Now, the reason this is too is because they have actually quite a number of different devices. And if I'll sort of quickly jump back to my here's an example of one of them. So this is an ultrasonic IoT meter. This particular one is NB IoT enabled, and now this particular meter actually uses a technology to connect to the internet called Sigfox networks, and it's able to directly connect to the internet, and you're able to connect this directly to the IoT hub, and I'll talk more about that. Now, if you come back to our good architecture, so you have this smart meter and old one. So the old ones push data into a collector, and this is a virtual machine that collects all this data and sort of transitions that. But the newer meter is actually able to talk directly into the IoT hub. So they go through the Sigfox cloud and push data. And so within the Sigfox cloud, you have a digital twin of this device, and a digital twin is actually just a digital copy of the device in the cloud. And what that allows you to do is to digitally model your entire environment. And so that digital twin, once you're connected to the IoT hub through your connection string, it's able to start pushing data into IoT hub. Now, once this data comes into the IoT hub, it goes through a service bus and into an API, and you can start now Power Apps, a Power BI dashboard, web and mobile applications, and they're using Azure Maps to showcase where these devices are stored. But also they're using Flow, Logic apps and functions to automate some really interesting business process. Then this data eventually gets stored into Azure SQL and into a data warehouse, and they're able to do some machine learning on top of this data, right? Cool. So let's actually jump into the technical bits of things, right? What I have here is Microsoft Azure, and to create an IoT hub is actually really simple, and that's sort of the first step that we'll do. You can just go ahead and click create a resource, put in your data. If you don't know how to provision services on Azure, pop over to my blog, and I've a couple of blogs around how to do this. But for this case, we already have one provision right here. Now, once you have this IoT hub provision, you can use the Azure IoT bulk provisioning service to if you're provisioning a number of devices. But in this case, we're only doing one device, so we'll just go over to our IoT devices, and right here you will see that I have 3 devices. I have my Raspberry Pi, I have my Android things, and my smart water meter. And so each of these devices are connected directly to my IoT hub. So if we go into the water meter, you have your device ID, primary connection string, and so this allows you to actually connect your device directly to IoT hub, and you can create digital twins. Now let's go back over to our devices. Now if we go over to Sigfox, you'll see we already have our device there, and you can put in some really interesting data around this device, what the device is, where it sits, what radios you have on there, what's a power supply looks like, what sensors you have on there, and the different certifications that you have, and that sort of starts describing the device. Now you see I already have a couple of devices there, and we'll talk about that. Now, since we have a bit of a licensing issue with Sigfox, I'm gonna try and replicate creating the same device using the Raspberry Pi. Right, so the first thing you want to do is set up your Raspberry Pi, connect it into power, and if you're running the default Raspberry Pi application, that's actually a good way we can start, but you can run a lot of custom software on it. So the first thing we want to do is build an application, and I'm going to use an application built by the Microsoft team. It's actually on GitHub, and that's what you see right here. And I'm gonna pull this into our IoT device. So I'm just gonna go here to my Raspberry Pi. I already set up this in the past, and some really cool stuff you can do with a terminal. So I'm just gonna sign into there. So I already have this application installed, and you can clone it using Git, and I have already this application installed in my Raspberry Pi. And the first thing is I'm gonna go into the application. So I'm gonna actually go into the config file, and right here within this custom built application, there's a couple of things I've set this application to do is to simulate data, and it's gonna send a couple of interesting data points into our IoT hub. Now to run this application, I'll just exit off of here, and I'm gonna go do sudo node index.js, and that's where the application is. And I'll go over to Azure here to pick up our connection string, which was already created when we provisioned the device. So let me use the Raspberry Pi one. So I'm gonna go over here, copy our connection string, go back to our terminal, put it in there, and hit enter. And what that application will do is it'll start the application, and it'll start sending data into the IoT hub. Now already just straight from my terminal, you can see it's pushing data into my IoT hub. And if I go back up to my hub, you'll see that this data starts showing up into the IoT hub, and already see my 3 devices there, and it's sending a number of messages into, so I think right now it's sent 1.8 thousand messages, and so you can do some really cool interesting stuff with the Azure IoT hub. So in the case of Peppo, they have built this really cool application that then pulls data from an Azure SQL data warehouse, which is fed by the Azure IoT hub, and pulls it into this Power BI dashboard that's embedded into the application. And right there you can start seeing all the devices that are that are connected to the IoT hub. You can see the battery voltage, signal strength, and the meter readings that you have. And you'll see a couple of them here in Nairobi and in a small town called Eldoret. That's actually where I grew up. And so you can really do some cool, interesting stuff with IoT. Now, if you want to learn more about what you can do with Azure and the IoT Hub, there's a couple of SDKs that you can start playing around with. You can go learn a lot more from Microsoft Learn and their entire learning paths and exams that you can do on Microsoft Learn, and you can join the IoT tech community on Microsoft Tech Communities to learn more. There's also a cool, really interesting show called the IoT Show. So hop over to Channel 9 and check out some of the videos that we have on here. I hope you learn a thing or two, so go out there and write good code.